Let's look at how to determine the different genotypes in a population of mice. So here we have a population of mice. We have 10 in this example population. Notice we have 8 black mice and 2 white mice. Black is dominant to white. Now what's the genotype of the white mice? So we know that white is recessive, so we know these 2 white mice are just little b, little b. We know their phenotype and their genotype. But what about the genotype of the black mice? Maybe they're all homozygous dominant, so big B, big B. Maybe they're all heterozygous, so big B, little b. Maybe it's 4 big B, and 4 big B, little b. We can actually find this out, and here is how we know this. If this is a randomly mating population that is under no other influences, so influences like migration, or poisoning, or new predators, or selective breeding, then we can actually use what is called the Hardy Weinberg equation to find out about these black mice, to find their genotype just with an equation. So here is what the Hardy Weinberg equation actually says. It says all of the mice that are big B, plus all of the mice that are big B, little b, plus all of the mice that are little b, that's going to be the whole population. That's going to equal all of the mice, or 100%, or 1.0. You got to remember, we can express 100% as 1.0. So here are each of the variables for each of the parts of this equation. We'll take a look at those now. Homozygous dominant, or BB, is what's called p squared. Heterozygous, or big B, little b, is 2pq. Homozygous recessive, well, that's q squared. Now you're just learning these variables, but it's important even right now to start to internalize what each of these means. P squared is the frequency, so it's a percentage, it's the frequency of mice that are homozygous dominant, or B, big B. 2pq is the frequency, so the percentage, of mice that are heterozygous, or big B, little b. Q squared is the frequency, or percentage, of mice that are little b. Now, as with any equation, if we can find 2 of these terms, we can solve the whole thing. Now, what's the easiest way to solve this equation? You can almost always find and count the white mice, and of course you can count up that total population, so you always know q squared. And that's what we're looking at right here. You're already looking at q squared. So let's use q squared and then turn that into q. Once we have q, we can get p because p plus q equals 1. We're going to look at what this means a little later in the video, but right now, p plus q equals 1. Then we can take the numbers for p and q, and we can plug them into the Hardy Weinberg. We can plug them into the p squared plus 2pq plus q squared, and we can find out how many mice are homozygous dominant, or big B, and how many mice are heterozygous, or big B, little b. Okay, let's look at the equation. What numbers do you know? What numbers do we not know? Well, we have no clue of what p squared is, at least right now. And we do not know 2pq. But we do know q squared. That's the percentage frequency of the population that is white mice. There are 2 white mice, or the BBs, there are 2 white mice out of 10. Here again is Hardy Weinberg. 2 out of 10 is q squared. So q squared, well, that equals 2 out of 10, or 0.2. 0.2. We know that q squared is 0.2. Now q, if we want to get q just all alone, q equals the square root of q squared. The square root of 0.2, and pause the video right now and plug it into a calculator, the square root of 0.2 is 0.4472. Let's just round this right now to 0.45. So we've got Q. Q equals 0.45. Now remember that I just said P plus Q equals 1. So if Q is 0.45, we can get P by subtracting 0.45 from 1. When we do that, we get 0.55. P is 0.55. So now we have Q is equal to 0.45. P is equal to 0.55. We can plug these two numbers into the Hardy Weinberg. Let's write the equation out. P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. We plug in P equals 0.55 and Q equals 0.45. P squared, when we square that, it's 0.325. 2PQ, when we plug that in, it's 0.495. And Q squared, when we square Q, we get 0.2025. What you got to remember here is that P squared is the frequency of homozygous dominant. It is BB. 2PQ is heterozygous. It is big B, little b. And Q squared is the recessives. The frequency of recessive in this case, it's coming out at 0.2025. Knowing this, if our total population is 10, well then the 0.325 of 10, well that's 3. 3 of the mice are homozygous dominant, or big B, big B. How about 0.495 out of 10? Well, that's 5. 5 of the mice are heterozygous, or big B, little b. And lastly, 0.2025 out of 10 is 2. That's what we knew already. 2 of the mice are little b, or white. 2 of the mice are white. And that matches what we observed. Let's look at that population of mice again. 2 are white, or, little b. 3 are homozygous dominant, or big B, and 5 are heterozygous, big B, little b. What's amazing is that the Hardy Weinberg equation is able to use the real patterns in nature, the real patterns of genetics and inherited traits to figure this out. So this is very powerful stuff, and this is real. Okay, let's review the two equations we've just looked at. There was the Hardy Weinberg equation, P squared, etc. And then that one that I kind of threw in there for now, the P plus Q equals 1. Now each of these two equations, they do represent very real things in this population and in all of nature and in genetics. So let's make sure we know what each equation and each variable represents. We'll start with the equation P plus Q equals 1. This is all about the alleles in this population. All of the dominant alleles. Look carefully. How many capital B's are in this population? Maybe pause right now and count them up. If we add all of the dominant alleles to all of the recessive alleles, we're going to get 100% or 1.0 of all of the alleles. Now, let's just show you here. Now, let's show you all of the dominant alleles. Here they are. Count them. There are, if you count them up, there are 11 out of 20 dominant alleles in total. There's 11 of them. Now let's count up all the recessive alleles. Okay, we've got the 2 white mice. Well, that's 4 recessive alleles here. But then we have these other recessive alleles from the heterozygous individuals. We have another 5 here for 9 out of 20 recessive alleles. Now 11 out of 20, that's 0.55 plus 9 out of 20. 9 out of 20 is 0.45. Well, what's 0.55 plus 0.45? That equals 1. So P and Q, they represent the number of alleles in a population. It's not about the number of individuals, it's about the number of alleles. That's what genetics is about though too, isn't it? It's about alleles. Now let's look at the Hardy Weinberg equation. We've got p squared plus 2pq plus q squared. That will equal 1. P squared is the percentage expressed as a frequency of dominant homozygous in the population. 2pq is the percentage, again, expressed as a frequency of heterozygous in the population. And q squared is the percentage expressed as a frequency of the recessive in the population. If we add these frequencies together, they will add up to 1.0 or 100% of the population. And in our example, 3 mice were dominant homozygous. P squared was 0.3. 5 mice were heterozygous. The 2pq was 0.5. 2 mice were recessive. Q squared was 0.2. Add those 3 up, they equal 1.0. Okay, one final summary of how these two equations work. If we are given the numbers of recessive individuals and a population total, we use p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1. So that's when you're given the number of individuals and that are recessive and the total population. You use the Hardy Weinberg. What if the question is asking about the recessive or the dominant alleles? If the question is asking about the allele frequencies, we use p plus q equals 1. So that's how to use those two equations. And lastly, p squared does indeed equal our dominant homozygous in the population. 2pq is the frequency of heterozygous in the population. Q squared is the frequency of recessive in the population. P is just the frequency of dominant alleles. Q is the frequency of recessive alleles. Okay, let's see what we're going to learn next.